Hi there, this is Gordon Andrus. I'm making a little video here to show you all some of the things to watch for when you're making finish cuts, or when basically just whenever you're using a swivel knife. Now I'll explain the way I do things and why I do it that way. And I want to start by just adjusting this knife, showing you how I adjust the length of the knife and why I do it that way. So this knife, I'm just going to put it together. Just snug that down a little bit. Now I'm going to check it against my palm. And this has become a pretty reliable way of finding this adjustment. And it's longer than you may be familiar with. But bear with me, I'll explain why I do it this way, and then you can try it and make up your own mind. That light too bright. Okay, this the reason for this length is to make the set up the knife long enough that when I'm using it, there's some tension in this finger that's automatically pushing the knife down. So when I put it in, up to the leather, just the weight of my hand and my arm is already starting to cut. So without pushing down with these fingers at all, so it's already cutting, and all I have to do is start it moving and it cuts. That frees up these fingers to not have to put a death grip on the knife. My hand doesn't get nearly as cramped as it used to since I started adjusting it this way. So these fingers here, my thumb and middle finger, are free now just to either turn the knife or drive it. But I don't have to grip it as tight as I would if I didn't have the knife adjusted this long. Okay? So let's just recap that. The pressure comes from the yoke, not from the fingers holding the barrel. The barrel is now able to be turned and manipulated with the other fingers of the hand. Okay? Now, I want to point out something about the way that the physics of the knife will work in the leather. We've got a straight, rigid blade that's being pushed into this soft material, and if I just turn the barrel, that the tension, the pressure applied, has to go somewhere, and it propels the knife forward just simply by turning the barrel. Now I've made a pretty deep cut there to show you how that works. If I'm cutting straight, then I'm going to be propelling the blade or the knife with, I'm going to come toward myself and show you how, with the pressure up here and the drive from here, I don't have to have any more of a grip on the knife than that to be able to drive it. So that's the basic ergonomics of the swivel knife. When I make this kind of a cut, sometimes if the cut is going to be long enough, you can get it started simply by rotating the barrel. But then you're going to have to start to apply some pressure from either behind or in front with the thumb to drive it. Then if I slow down, I can simply turn it and drive it forward by turning the barrel. Okay? One more thing that we want to talk about before I get started into some actual finish cuts is how to fade out a nice long cut. And I'll show you that here. I'm going to cut in this direction, and as I cut, I'm going to rotate this knife down in the direction that I'm cutting. So let's do that. I'll start the cut. The pressure's from up here. I'm going to have to drag it now because I'm going sideways. It requires a little more pressure on the barrel. Then as I cut, I'm going to tip it, and it actually lifts the knife out of the cut. And it just naturally makes a very smooth taper in the cut, to where you get down to where it's just basically a scratch. I've got this piece here that I want to look at before we actually start making some of these finished cuts. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, on this flower there's already a couple of different types of cuts. These are double straight cuts with the little cuts from the side coming in opposite to each other, or basically a mirror of each other. Now, these over here are what I think most folks call a stacked cut, because there's cuts on both sides of the center. Okay, so we'll just get familiar with that. They all fade out nicely, and these double cuts, we try and keep them so that they relate well to each other. Okay, that's the key to this cut and this one, its neighbor right here, is how well they follow each other toward toward the center of the flower here, which would be like a vanishing point. Okay, then this is a little acanthus leaf type cut that I particularly like, and it's repeated over here. I'll show you how I do those. Here's another example of the double cut right there. Okay, these are little shading cuts, as are these, and they're very light. They aren't deep cuts, and actually none of these cuts are very deep. I'll be cutting probably a little bit deeper as I show you initially, so that it's easier to see in the video. Okay, now I want to start out by talking about these double cuts and the order that I like to cut them in, depending on which direction I'm cutting from. It helps when you're making a cut, a neighboring cut like this one and this one, to cut them in an order that you can see the first cut while you're making the second cut. So let's get to that, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll zoom back out. All right. If I'm making these double cuts, or these neighbor cuts from the right moving to the left, I'm going to cut the top cut first so that I can see it the whole time I'm making the bottom cut, which will be longer. If I were to cut the bottom cut first, when I get around here to where I really need to be able to see, grab my stylus, get around here to where I need to see this cut back here so that I can gauge against it, I can't see it now. And it's a lot easier to go awry. Okay, it is, I'm going to point out here in a little bit, with especially with the stacked cuts in the flower petal, that you do need to be able to practice just by watching this tail, where that how to make that cut blind. But if you don't have to, then set it up so that you can make cuts that you can see. Now it's covered up a little bit right there, but I can see it back here, and I can see its tail, so I can see most of the cut the whole time I make the second one. Coming from the left going over to the right, it's the opposite. Okay, I'm going to make the bottom cut first, and I'm tipping my knife down as I make that cut so that it'll fade out nice like that. And then the second cut, I can see the first one the whole way down. That's the easiest direction to cut from. Okay, in a straight cut, I'm going to move from left to right, because I'm right-handed, because then I can see the previous cut as I go, and I can make them relate to each other well. Okay, then if I want to make these little cuts to the side, it would help on this side if I maybe made the bottom one first, then I can see it when I'm making the top one, and the same over here. And that helps you. That helps you along the way. Okay. Now I want to just move on to the little... okay. I'm looking up here at my cheat sheet so I can keep straight. Let me strop this knife a little bit. So let's move on to the stacked cuts from a flower petal, like these. And when I'm cutting on one side, I'll be able to see the previous cuts. When I'm cutting on the other side of the first center cuts, I won't be able to. So let's just make the this one's going to come from left to right, and I'll make the long cut that goes toward the flower petal, goes toward the flower center. This cut's longer than this one in this particular arrangement. There's other ways to cut stacked cuts, but this is the way this particular set are going to be made. So then there's a small cut, and now I can keep going in this direction. And I can see each previous cut as I go. But when I come over here, if I were to start down here and work this direction, I might not get my spacing to work out right. I'd be able to see the cuts as I go, but it could get ruined and messed up as I get toward the center. So as I make this cut, I can't see right to the side but I can see its tail down here. So I'm gonna just when I make that cut, I'm actually watching this. I'm not watching the cut as it's being made. Let me grab my stylus again. So I'm going to make this next one, and I can't see anything behind the knife, but I can see this much of the previous cut. So that's what I'm going to watch. The whole time I make this cut, I'm looking at my stylus. The stylus, that's not the prettiest cut in the world, but you get the idea. The stylus and the blade are completely in the way of my cut, but it ends up pretty much where I want it to be because I've been watching this tail down here. Okay? I'll do that quicker. Now the cuts aren't flicks. I'm not flicking the blade as I make these cuts. They're cut just as deliberately as any cuts that I would make before beveling and for the tooling part. Okay. I'm just checking my cheat sheets to see if I've covered, oh, okay, the acanthus leaves. Okay, little S-curves. Now, an S-curve, of course, is just a combination of two arcs, or two curves. So I can keep the knife the same depth in the cut the whole time, and then just change direction. A little bit right in the center there, I have to apply a little more driving pressure before I start the turn, so it doesn't end up having that little point right in there. If you want it to be a smooth S-curve, you have to drive it through the center part of the cut a little bit. When I'm making these acanthus leaves, I'm going to lighten up and then cut back down in again. So I'm just turning the barrel, pressure's from above, turn the barrel, and I like to put my pinky down right there so that I can use it to kind of help me scoot the knife like that. So, and then make the reverse part. Okay? Turn that way, turn that way, turn that way, turn that way. There's no drive coming from except the tiniest little bit in the center. Most of the action is just in turning the barrel. If I were doing flower petals, I'd just be turning the barrel, lighten up. See, I'm basically clear out of the cut, and that little cut right there, right here is where my pedal lifter is going to fit in. If you try to make that cut all the way to the end and then turn it, it ends up being too big for this type of flower petal. These petals were all cut this way. Let me do it again. Now I'm basically, I've let go of the knife and I'm just going to turn it. Then make the next cut. Okay, I've got this right there. I was watching the camera, not my cut. Let me back out a little bit and start watching the cut instead of the camera. It's my phone. Okay. Now, because I've basically let off all the pressure, I can just turn that back around and make the next one. And it didn't tear out, didn't cause any, damage. I didn't get, if I come back, I could crunch it around like that, trying to keep the knife making the cut, but I can rely on the pedal lifter to do that for me. I'll just grab it here and show you if I can find one. So let's see. Let me cut 2. And this little tool will fit right down into there. I need to adjust my lights a little bit. So now we'll just recap really quick. Pressure comes from above, from the yoke down, and the drive comes from the middle finger or the thumb. This allows you to be able to use the knife in basically any direction or combination that you need to, because there's not a ton of pressure being applied. I'm not locked up. My hands are not locked up. Okay? You can cut across, you can cut down, you can cut around in front of yourself, you know, all the way around. You can turn the work as you cut. It's all kinds of combinations that you can do if you haven't got yourself locked up by having the knife too short and a death grip on it. Okay? Then you lift it out of the cut to make a taper, a nice long taper, by rotating in the direction that the knife is moving. Tip it down toward your hand as you go, or in the direction that you're moving. If I was cutting away from myself, it would be away from my hand. And that's much easier than you think it would be if you haven't tried that. Also notice that my finger, my index finger, moves all over the yoke. And it has to, because the knife is tilting in multiple directions, and I can't crank my wrist around. Don't make your cuts by cranking your wrist in a curve. The knife has a nice 2 bearings up here to make it nice and smooth so that you can just turn the barrel. And then tip it toward myself as I make those cuts. You can see in a finished piece the benefit of being able to make these long tapered cuts. This cut right here starts tapering as soon as it starts past this next leaf. And it's tapering and tapering and tapering all the way down. Of course, the beveling has to match that too. Well, I think that about covers it for now. I hope that this helps. I hope you've enjoyed the articles in the journal that I've been writing. You can check those out if you haven't seen them in the Leather Crafters and Saddlers journal. You can order previous editions, older editions, and track that if you'd like. Certainly keep coming back to my blog, and I'll have some coursework eventually, hopefully sooner than later, that will combine some of these little videos into full-size, full-length courses that will cover a variety of different leatherworking techniques. Thank you.